Today we're going to go over removing a air conditioning system. This is a 96 Ford F-150 and our air conditioner compressors here. The compressor is the heart of the AC system. It is what pumps the refrigerant through the system and increases the pressure and the temperature of it. It uses a pulley assembly. When the AC is not engaged, the pulley spins without driving the compressor. And then to engage the compressor, we use a magnetic clutch. So when you turn your air conditioning on, it creates a magnetic field, and that sucks this clutch plate up against the pulley assembly, and then it drives the compressor. You can see how this one is faulty. So it's really hard to buy just a clutch assembly. That's how we used to repair these. We would just pull the clutch assembly off, put on a new one, and we were done. Being that most of the compressors today are sold aftermarket, the clutch assemblies are not universal. So now we replace the entire compressor when the clutch goes bad. Our first step is to remove any refrigerant from the system. In order to do that, we need to locate the fittings for it. There are two fittings. One is called the high side fitting, and it's located on the thinner line. And one is called the low side or low pressure, and that's located on the fatter or thicker line. The reason the lines are different sizes is because when something is under pressure, it occupies less space. So if we look at our two lines coming out of the back of the compressor, this line would be the low and this line would be the high side. If we follow it, we can then find our fitting or our service port. It has a cap on it. That cap is very, very important because it is what seals this port. So if you don't have these caps on, you're going to end up losing all the refrigerant. So make sure you don't lose that cap. Then we are going to locate the low side port, which is typically going to be found on this type of system that uses an accumulator. It's going to be found next to the accumulator. So we're going to go ahead and remove that cap as well. There, that one's a little tight, so we're going to pop it off with a pair of pliers. Don't squeeze too much, you don't want to crack the cap. But they do get dry because there's a rubber seal inside of there, and the rubber will grab onto the metal. So once we get it free, we will then take that off, and then don't lose that cap either. So make sure you place it somewhere where it's safe. Once we've removed the caps, we're now going to hook up an AC recovery machine to it, and we're going to suck all the refrigerant out of the vehicle. The recovery process will take about 15 minutes or longer depending on the type of system that you have. There are two basic air conditioning systems. One uses a thermostatic expansion valve, which is called a variable orifice, and it uses a receiver dryer as a filter and to remove any water from the system. The other type is a fixed orifice using an orifice tube, and it uses an accumulator to filter out any debris and to prevent liquid refrigerant from reaching the compressor. This is a fixed orifice, so it has an accumulator. This process will take a little bit longer because we must vaporize all of the refrigerant inside of the accumulator. On a hot day, it's not that big of a problem, but if you're working in cold weather, if you use a blow dryer or a heat gun to heat up the accumulator, it will make the process faster. Or you can start the engine, turn the vent motor on, and that can help increase the heat around the accumulator and make it vaporize more quickly. How do we know when all of the refrigerant is gone? Well, once the machine reaches zero pressure, we wait for 5 minutes to see if the pressure rises. If the pressure does not rise, then we know the system is empty and we can go ahead and remove the components we're changing. If the pressure goes above zero, this indicates there is still refrigerant present, and we will keep repeating that process until the gauge remains below zero. Now we will cover using the AC machine in a different segment. This is focusing on changing the compressor. So we have removed all of the refrigerant. The system remained underneath the vacuum. So we are going to go ahead and remove the compressor. We want to remove the electrical connector. If you just yank on it, you can end up damaging the wires or the connector. So I've always found that if we slip a pick between the two pieces and just pry gently, we're able to remove the connector without damaging it. Next, we're going to tuck it out of the way. And we are going to remove the compressor. The compressor is held on by 4 10mm bolts. So we're going to go ahead and pull those off. Once we have the 4 bolts removed, we can then tilt the compressor forward, and that will allow us to get to the hose connection on the back, and we're going to go ahead and remove that. Do not lose the bolt. If we weren't going to replace the accumulator, we would then plug these 2 port passageways to prevent air from making it to the accumulator. Air contains moisture, and inside of the accumulator there is a component called a desiccant that absorbs moisture out of air or out of the refrigerant. If we were to leave the system uncapped for more than 20 or 30 minutes, it would become fully saturated and there would be no way to remove that moisture, and we would have to replace that part anyways. So it's a good idea, place a piece of tape or something over it to prevent moisture from running up the lines. Once we've removed the compressor, we now want to measure how much oil was in this compressor. So we need some type of a beaker that has a graduations on it to make measurements. And we are going to go ahead and hold this upside down and drain it out. Now, if you have a sturdy beaker, you can set it on the beaker, but be careful, you don't want to shatter it. And we're going to turn the clutch assembly while we do it to turn the pump to get any of the hidden oil out. And sometimes you will get no oil out of the system. So if we look in this case, we can see that my glass is empty. It's not even half full or half empty. It is completely empty. So we got no oil out of this, so we're gonna just add the amount specified on the new compressor. We are putting on a Napa compressor. It comes with the directions. This is kind of important because it's going to tell us how much oil to put in this. Sometimes they come with oil already in them. Sometimes they do not. So don't assume that there is oil in that compressor. If you do and you fail to add oil, you will end up frying the compressor and they will not warranty it. Also, most manufacturers of air conditioning compressors will not warranty the compressor unless you purchase a receiver dryer along with it. And sometimes they even want you to replace the condenser depending on what type of receiver dryer it has. If the unit's a rebuilt unit, then you're going to need the old one for a core. If it's a new one like this one, then we don't have to worry about the core. Just like Christmas, throw your packing away. Do not re-gift it. Compare it to the old one and make sure they are the same. So if we look at them, we can see that the connectors are the same. We can see the mounting is the same. And we're going to go ahead and pull the plug that it's shipped with out of the back so we can make sure that the mounting for the hoses is the same. Don't tear the little brightly colored tag because that's some valuable information on there. And we'll see what it says here in a minute. You hear the big poof? That's because the system is sealed under pressure to prevent moisture from being sucked into it. All right, our little tag says that this compressor is pre-charged with 3 ounces of oil. You must add the recommended amount and type. And it gives you a little QR code so that you can scan that to get any additional information. So at this point, we are going to add any refrigerant that we need. So we're going to look up what is the compressor capacity, and then we'll add the difference. Before we add the oil, we're going to measure the clutch gap, because when I measure the clutch gap, if I added oil first, it would run out. The clutch gap is the distance between the clutch plate and the clutch pulley assembly. If this gap is too small, the clutch will drag, causing it to wear and kind of rotate during operation. If the clutch gap is too large, it may not have enough magnetic energy to suck it up against the clutch pulley, and it will not spin the compressor at all, or it'll make a loud snapping noise anytime that you engage the clutch. So you'll be in the car and you'll actually hear it snap, and the customer can complain. Now the specification for this is between 16 and 26 thousandths of an inch. So we're going to use the go, no-go method. So first we're going to try the 16. If it fits, then we know it's larger than 16. All right, so that fits easily. Now I'm going to add 10 thousandths to that. So now it's 26 thousandths. And when I do this, you can see that it barely fits. All right, so it's pretty close to the right setting. If the setting is incorrect, we will then pull this bolt out of the center. Then we will remove the clutch plate itself by just wiggle it. You can pry on it just a little bit, but don't damage it. All right? Then if we look inside, there will be little shims inside of here. So I'm going to take a pick and I'm going to fetch those shims out of there, so you can see what they look like. Once I've decided on the thickness of shim, I'll go ahead and drop the shim back in. And I've always found it easiest to hold it with the bolt while I'm trying to thread it in. That way it doesn't walk away from me. So I'm going to put the bolt down in there, and that'll hold the washer or the shim in place. Then I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and set it on the compressor. Give it a little tap, and then we are going to go ahead and tighten the bolt. Now there is a torque spec for this bolt, so make sure that you torque it. Otherwise you could end up over tightening it or not tightening it enough. So we're just going to run it in, and then we're going to go ahead and torque it. When you're working with stuff that's this small, or this the bolts are that small, your digital torque wrenches are your best bet. It'll prevent you from creating any problems. So you're gonna have to hold it when you tighten it. So sometimes the easiest way to do that is drop a little screwdriver in there and then hold the screwdriver while you torque it. As you do that, sometimes it's easier if you lay it down as well. That way you can get some leverage on it. We're going to hold it with that side, and we are going to apply some pressure. It can be a big pain in the butt because it's trying to pull. If you can't get it torqued like this now, do it when you have it in the car once you apply the belt, and it'll make it a little bit easier on you. So now we're going to go ahead and check the clutch gap again to see whether or not we have the correct dimension. So I'm going to do my 16 and my 10, which is going to give me the maximum 26, and we'll see if it'll go in there. And you can see that it's kind of hard to fit, so I know that my gap is good. So we're now going to add the oil. So turn it upside down, remove the plug that we put in there to prevent it from leaking all over the counter. And the oil type that's used in 134 is called PAG. And PAG is hydroscopic, which means it will absorb water. So we want to make sure that we only use it from a sealed container. So now we're going to go ahead and pour in 4 ounces of oil. And this is just regular oil, but I'm going to add a little dye to it, so if there is a leak later, we can find it. So 4 ounces converts to 118 milliliters. So we're going to add the dye. We're at 100 milliliters right now. We're going to add the dye, and we're going to get it up to right about 118, 120. So now when I put this dye in there, if we have a leak, I then can use a ultraviolet or black light, and it will make this liquid glow, and it'll make it easy to find the leak. So I'm then going to add some of the oil into the low side, and then some of the oil into the high side. If it gets full, then go ahead and rotate the compressor clutch, and that'll rotate the compressor itself, which will then allow it to accept more oil. So I've now added the oil, so we're good. Now we're going to change the O-rings. We don't want to use the O-rings that came with it because the plug that they use already compressed the O-ring. So we're going to use a pick, and we're gently going to pull those O-rings out. I'm going to pull that one out. And then we are going to pull this guy out. And then we're going to match them up with a new set of O-rings. If you go and buy just these O-rings, you only get the 2, but most of the time we're going to use a assortment of O-rings. So we're going to try to match this up. On most assortments on the display, they'll have a picture of their actual size. So we could actually hold up to there and see which O-ring it is. And in this case, it's going to be this one. And then the other one's the same size, so it's going to be the same as that. Now we don't want to put the O-rings on dry because it could cause them to twist or tear. So you have a little bit of oil left in your beaker. So then you're just going to take and rub a little bit of oil on them and place them in the O-ring capture. And then we're going to rub a little oil on this one and place this one in the O-ring capture as well. So now we have new O-rings installed. This is going to keep it from leaking. I'm now ready to install the lines on this and reinstall it in the car. So putting it back together is the reverse of taking it apart. So we're going to set it in, make sure it's facing the right way with the connector for the clutch facing up. And we're going to put the lines on first. Don't turn it upside down. If you do, you will end up losing all your oil. Push the lines in, then go ahead and start the bolt. Make sure that the bolt, ouch. If you start it crooked, you'll end up stripping or damaging the threads inside of the compressor, and then you're going to have to replace the compressor, and they won't warranty thread damage. So we're going to tighten it up with a hand wrench or a socket. Don't use air on it tightening it up because you could cause an issue. And then once we get it bolted down, then we're going to torque the two sides. Don't rush. If you rush, you may end up being unhappy. So just make sure it stays lined up the entire time you're tightening it. Once you get some experience, you'll know how it should feel, and then you will be able to work more quickly. But for now, it's best to do the job right, even if it takes a little bit longer. And then we're going to torque it the rest of the way later. Next, we are going to install our mounting bolts. So we're going to set the compressor like this. Make sure the wires are not trapped. And we're going to go ahead and reinstall the clutch control wire. Make sure it seats all the way. And then we're going to install our bolts. Go ahead and start them all by hand. And then once you have them all started, we can run them in with an electric impact. And now we have installed an AC compressor. Next, we would install the belt, and then we are going to change the accumulator and the orifice tube. So this is a serpentine belt. We changed the idler pulley. It had excessive play in it. So we're going to go ahead and put the new idler pulley on. Always compare them because sometimes they'll get you the wrong one, or they'll send you a couple of them and say, hey, pick the one that's the best or works the best. So we have the correct one. So we're going to go ahead and install this guy. This one uses a Torx bolt, which is like a 6-sided star to hold it on. So if you don't have a set of Torx wrenches or sockets, then you're going to want to get a set to be able to do these jobs. You can get them at AutoZone or Sears, relatively cheap. If you're going to do this for a living, of course, well, there's better tool companies than that. All right. So take the belt, make sure you inspect it. If it has more than 1 crack per inch, then you want to replace it. So we're going to take it like this, and on the dash of some cars, they will have a map, and that map will tell us how the belt is routed. So just in case you forget, so always look on the radiator support. So we're going to go ahead and feed this guy down. So it goes over the crankshaft. Then one side goes up over the water pump. Then it goes over the power steering pump. Then it goes over the AC compressor. Then it goes over the air pump or the idler. Then it goes around the tensioner and around the alternator, but we're not going to be able to get that on there until we loosen the tension. Now these have automatic tensioners on them, so it's helpful to have a tool like this that allows us to get some leverage on it. If you don't have a fancy serpentine belt, you can always just use a ratchet and a socket. So you're going to go ahead and pull the belt tensioner away from the direction of tightening, and then you're going to go ahead and finish routing the belt. So we're going to go over the tensioner, we're going to go over the alternator, make sure that it does not slip off of the other pulleys. So we want to make sure that it stays on all of the pulleys while we're doing this. And then it's going to go under the idler, like so. And then we're going to go ahead and let up on the tension, and then we're going to double check to make sure that all the grooves of the serpentine belt are in each pulley. And once we've done that, we have now installed an AC compressor. In a different episode, we will cover charging and recharging the system and evacuation and those steps that are required to refill it. And we are going to cover changing the accumulator and the orifice tube as well. So I hope you enjoyed learning about how to change an AC compressor, and I will see you next time. Thank you.